Good morning, and thank you for being here with us today. My name is Tyler McCann, Executive Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. Before I begin today's discussion, it is important for me to acknowledge that I come from Western Quebec, the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation.
A quick note that as with all CAPI webinars, today's dialogue will be available shortly after the event on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel where you will be notified as soon as the recording is live and of all future CAPI videos. While you're at our YouTube channel, check out our past recordings, including our recent panel discussion on the future of the Environmental Farm Plan. The 2020-2022 CAPI Doctoral Fellowship Program is an interdisciplinary group of young scholars who are working on a particular aspect of soil health and Canadian agriculture. In the first year of the program, each doctoral fellow was required to produce an individual report and presented it at a webinar last June. In the second and final year of the fellowship, the fellows bring their diverse interdisciplinary skill sets together to collaborate on a group project on the topic of soil health and Canadian agriculture, which you will hear more about today. They were guided by an advisory group of experts from across the country. We thank the advisory group members for their expertise and insight and support for the fellows. The group report will be published shortly after the webinar, and we will ensure you all receive a copy. The Doctoral Fellows Report and this webinar is sponsored in part by the RBC Foundation and is part of CAPI's larger environmental initiative, Spearheading Solutions, helping farmers operate better, smarter, and more environmentally sustainably. This initiative aims to leverage public and private policies to aid in the rapid adoption of beneficial management practices, increase the implementation of new tools and technologies to maximize environmental and social outcomes. We are grateful for the support of the RBC Foundation for this project, and I would now like to introduce Graham Watt, Senior Director and Head of Climate Technology at the Royal Bank of Canada, to say a few words on behalf of the RBC Foundation to open today's dialogue.
Okay, thank you. I won't take much time away from today's exciting conversation. Thank you to the organizers and our investigators for delivering such high quality and critical research. RBC is proud to be a sponsor of this initiative. We believe that climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time. And as one of the largest banks globally, we know we have an important role to play in supporting the transition to net zero. Our climate blueprint outlines the action we're taking through 4 strategic priorities, and I'll go through those with touching on the relevant ones for today's research. So we're helping clients as they transition to net zero by working with them to understand and shape their journeys, supporting them with financing, products, and services. And to that end, we've committed to facilitating $500 billion in sustainable financing by 2025. Second, we're advancing net zero leadership in our own operations by moving to 100% renewable energy sources and minimizing our reliance on carbon offsets, both by 2025 as a way to reach net zero. And more relevant for today, we're informing and inspiring a sustainable future by advancing climate solutions and policy through thought leadership, active partnerships across public and private sectors, and support for climate research and innovation. And today's research is supported by RBC Foundation through RBC's Tech for Nature strategy, which has pledged $100 million by 2025 to universities and charities developing solutions to address climate change. And since 2019, we've funded over 100 initiatives with more than 27 million donated to support 125 community partnerships. And the last priority is holding ourselves accountable. We've committed to achieve net zero emissions in our lending by 2050, and today's research contributes to solving this challenge. Roughly a quarter of our emissions from business loans are attributed to agriculture. So as we deepen our understanding of soil carbon sequestration and advance related techniques and policy, we create the means by which our clients and the broader sector can reach net zero. So it's really important work, and we thank you. With that, I'll pass back to Tyler.
Thank you very much, Graham. climate change is certainly a critical issue, and agriculture has enormous potential to play an important role as a solutions provider. But in order for agriculture to fulfill its full potential, we need all partners, governments, producers, industry, and service providers and enablers like banks, like the Royal Bank, to be at the table. We appreciate RBC Foundation's ongoing support of this project. I now have the privilege of introducing our moderator for today's webinar, Senator Rob Black. We're excited to have Senator Black moderate the Doctoral Fellows webinar again this year after moderating the first one in June 2020. Senator Black is certainly passionate about agriculture, food, and the soils that enable it to be produced. He has brought that passion developed through a career in agriculture, including time with the Advanced Agricultural Leadership Program at the Rural Ontario Institute, at 4-H Ontario, and time serving on Wellington County Council. We are pleased that Senator Black followed his son's prompting and applied to be a senator in 2016 because he now brings that passion to the Senate, where he was recently appointed as chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. Not one to sit idly by, Senator Black has championed the cause of soil health in the Senate and has been successful in getting the Senate to agree to undertake a soil health study, a follow-up to the landmark 1984 Senate study, Soil at Risk, Canada's Eroding Future. With the critical, complex job that soil has in supporting food security, the environment, and the economy, we look forward to participating as the study moves forward and to seeing its results. Over to you, Senator Black.
Thank you, Tyler, and I'm pleased to moderate today's panel discussion with your impressive lineup of young scholars. It's good to see the CAPI Doctoral Fellows again. Hannah Lieberman, Lisa Ashton, Callum Morrison, and Marie-Élise Samson, who are a multidisciplinary team focused on integrating scientific research and data into policy development around climate change mitigation and the role that carbon sequestration can play in Canada's cropland. Their report argues that to elevate policy's role in increasing carbon sequestration in Canadian cropland, a science-based and systems approach to policy design should be considered. And we're going to hear more about that today. And I want to just say it's great to see them again, having joined them a year ago, as you noted. Today, the Doctoral Fellows will present their research findings, which will be followed by a moderated discussion and questions from the audience. So I have a number of questions, but I will encourage our followers, the audience, to ask questions as well if they so wish. So now I have the pleasure of introducing the CAPI Doctoral Fellows. Hannah Lieberman is a PhD candidate at McGill University. Her research focuses on understanding how flooding impacts soil carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycling in agricultural systems. Before coming to McGill, Hannah completed her BSc in biology at Grinnell College in Iowa and spent several years working in agroecology research and conservation, focused positions in Namibia, West Virginia, and Florida. Lisa Ashton is a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph with experience as a consultant specializing in agro-environmental stewardship. Lisa applies an informed, strategic, and systems approach to explore how policy and market mechanisms can better position farmers to successfully transition to a low-carbon economy where food systems are climate resilient, economically viable, and meet the needs of society. Lisa holds an honors degree in international development from the University of Ottawa, as well as her master's in global change, ecosystem science and policy from the University College Dublin in Ireland and Justus Liebig University in Germany. Callum Morrison is a graduate student at the University of Manitoba, specializing in cover cropping on the Canadian prairies. Callum has enjoyed connecting with more than 1,300 farmers across 4 Canadian provinces for his research through the Prairie Cover Crop Survey and the Ontario Cover Crop Feedback. His research will provide invaluable information to future cover croppers across this country. And finally, Marie-Élise Samson is an agronomist and assistant professor in soil science at Université Laval in Quebec. She's interested in soil agropedology, soil biogeochemistry, and pedometry. Through her research, she aims at developing a better understanding of carbon and nitrogen cycles in soils. She also works on developing new technologies to facilitate soil carbon monitoring at different scales. So with that, I'll call on our doctoral fellows to begin their presentation. As I noted at the end of it, we'll have a series of questions and an open discussion when they're finished. Thanks very much. Over to you, Doctoral Fellows.
Thank you, Senator Black, for that introduction, and thank you for everyone joining us today. We're very excited to present our research entitled Translating Science to Policy, Increasing Soil Carbon Sequestration in Canada's Croplands. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'd like to touch a little bit about how we approached our report and our research. So as was said before, we are an interdisciplinary team and we each specialize in a different area of climate change mitigation in Canadian agricultural systems, from really basic sciences to much more applied and policy design practices. And so we found it really essential when we were approaching our chosen topic of carbon sequestration in cropland that we both use our own expertise as well as learn from each other to really get at the complexities of these issues. We focused on 4 key topics for the report: foundations, understanding soil organic carbon; interventions, adopting practices to increase soil organic carbon; contextual factors, influences on adoption; and science and policy, strengthening the interface between the two. So in coming years, Canadian agriculture can play a really key role in climate change mitigation and really improve climate change outcomes. Soil is the largest terrestrial carbon sink, and it contains approximately 2 to 3 times the amount of carbon that is currently in the atmosphere, and it has the potential to store even more carbon. Cropland represents about 93.5 million acres in Canada, so it's a really huge area with a lot of soil with the potential to store more carbon. So Canadian cropland really presents a unique opportunity to identify and encourage beneficial management practices that enhance carbon sequestration. So what is carbon sequestration? Carbon sequestration is the process in which plants uptake carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. It's incorporated into their biomass. And when plants decompose, that carbon enters the soil, and it can either be stored long-term in the soil, or microbes can respire it out in the form of carbon dioxide. And this balance between the carbon inputs into the soil and carbon losses from the soil really will determine the role of soils in the global carbon cycle. And so the goal of carbon sequestration is to increase the amount of carbon that stays in the soil and decrease the amount that is lost.
Great. So carbon sequestration in croplands has really come to the forefront of the conversation of agricultural's role in contributing to climate change mitigation. According to Canada's National Greenhouse Gas Inventory on sources and sinks, on average, Canada's croplands are a carbon sink. However, the inventory suggests that carbon removals via cropland have recently experienced a declining trend, and there is significant regional variability, which means not all croplands are absorbing carbon at the same rate, and some are even net emitters. So for example, in the prairie provinces, the adoption of beneficial management practices, including conservation tillage and summer fowl, a reduction in summer fowl, were the main drivers behind the relatively high carbon removals via croplands in the early to mid 2000s. While in other regions of Canada, it has been found that soil organic carbon levels have experienced an overall decrease due to shifts in management practices and changes in crop type. This regional variability really suggests that to optimize outcomes, strategies to promote adoption and the practices themselves will look very different depending on which region you're in. And Marie-Élise will share more on this in the results section as well. Next slide, please. So as the carbon sequestration trends suggest, soils across Canada inherently contain very different properties and experience varying environmental conditions that impact its function, which makes researching soils very complex. Producers, agronomists, and researchers can evaluate the state and quality of a given soil by looking at its soil health. Soil health is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital ecosystem, sustaining humans, plants, and animals. And it's a really useful framework to evaluate and better understand the complexity of soils. So to apply this in evaluating cropland soil function, using the soil health framework can allow for a more comprehensive understanding of the co-benefits and trade-offs associated with practices for the purpose of enhancing carbon sequestration. So keeping this broader context in mind, Marie-Élise will now describe the different levers for enhancing carbon sequestration. Next slide, please.
So the question really is, how can we increase carbon sequestration in agricultural soils? Well, we basically have three different levers to increase organic carbon stocks in agricultural soils. As Hannah explained earlier, carbon sequestration happens when plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to produce plant organic matter through photosynthesis. Well, the first lever to increase soil organic carbon stocks is therefore to increase the rate of photosynthesis per unit area of soil. So this can be achieved by ensuring that the soil is covered with living plants, both in time and in space. Including cover crops or perennial crops in the rotation could be a great strategy to increase organic carbon stocks with the first lever. So now the second lever is the amount of organic matter that will be returned to the soil. Indeed, in agriculture, part of the plant biomass will be harvested and sold. In some systems, it is, however, possible to return part of the plant to the soil, which allows us to optimize the organic matter inputs to the soil. For example, returning wheat straw to the soil or planting green manure at the end of the season would be strategies that would have an effect on the second lever. And lastly, the third lever does not exactly increase soil organic carbon stocks, but aims to limit carbon losses. Indeed, once more, as Hannah explained earlier, when carbon ends up in the soil in the form of organic matter, it can be stabilized in the soil over the long term, or it can be partly or totally respired by the microorganisms and returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So in agriculture, reducing tillage intensity could, for example, have an effect on this third lever. Next slide, please. So theoretically, carbon sequestration in soil can be achieved through the adoption of beneficial management practices. So these practices can not only help increase soil carbon stocks, but they can also offer other significant co-benefits, such as improved soil health, drought resilience, and water quality. Commonly used beneficial practices therefore include reduced tillage, of course, but also improved crop rotations and cover cropping. Next slide, please. So while the idea that adopting a practice that can simultaneously optimize all ecosystem services provided by agricultural soils may seem quite logical and very appealing, it is important to remember that soils are complex and highly variable systems. For this reason, the same practice will not necessarily have the same effect in two different pedoclimatic contexts. To illustrate this idea, here is a case study that compares the potential impact of no-till adoption in Western versus Eastern Canada. So under the relatively dry conditions of Western Canada, the adoption of no-till has many benefits. No-till and surface the presence of crop residues at the soil surface increase soil resistance to erosion, but it also keeps more moisture in the soil, which is good for crop yields. Ultimately, no-till also helps increase organic carbons under those conditions. However, under the cold and humid conditions of Eastern Canada, the average effect of no-till adoptions are quite different. In Eastern Canada, no-till also increases soil erosion resistance. However, under the cold and humid conditions, no-till in the presence of crop residues at the soil surface can create waterlogging and significantly slow down soil warming in the spring. Thus, on average, it is estimated that the adoption of no-till reduces yields by about 5% under cold and wet climate conditions. Finally, there is generally no differences in soil carbon stocks when no-till is compared to inversion tillage under those cold and humid conditions. So this was just to illustrate that the net effect of a given management practice varies, and it varies not only from a region to the other, but also from a farm to the other, and I would even say from a field to the other. So when developing policies based on practice recommendations, it is really essential to remember this variability. Next slide, please. Another major challenge for soil scientists and policymakers is to find ways to efficiently measure, monitor, and report soil organic carbon changes. Indeed, current standardized methods for soil carbon stocks measurements are very costly, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of time and energy. This is partly due to the very high spatiotemporal variability of soils. Many other uncertainties also remain regarding soil organic carbon stocks monitoring, such as deep soil carbon, an issue we discuss in our report. Finally, research efforts should also focus on better understanding soil carbon cycle and the development of new technologies such as imaging spectroscopy, artificial intelligence, and modeling. These new technologies could help reduce measurement costs and help optimize the benefits and the benefits for soil-based climate solutions. Next slide, please.
So, what are the major barriers and enabling conditions for beneficial management practice adoption in Canada? So, there are many different barriers across Canada, and these can vary from farm to farm, but some of the major barriers include the upfront costs. So, the costs associated with beneficial management practice adoption, such as maybe a farmer needs to purchase additional equipment, maybe they need to make additional passes on their land, maybe they need to purchase seed for cover crops. And then you have the perceived increased uncertainty and risk for producers adopting beneficial management practices. So many different practices that are adopted, such as cover crops, can increase the complexity on a farm, and that may increase risk. And then we finally have agri-environmental limitations. So many beneficial management practices will be limited by environmental factors such as climate and soil type. So for example, the shortness of the growing season or the availability of moisture will play a big role there. So what can we try and do to enable better management practice adoption? So if we can actually provide farmers with evidence of return on their investment. So for example, if we can show farmers what the actual financial impacts of adopting beneficial management practice, as well as the impacts on the environment that they'll realistically see and in what time scale, as well as if we can engage producers in policy and program design, and if we can provide producers with an affordable measurement and monitoring tools so they can really see what effects that beneficial management practices are having on their farms. Next slide, please. So a few things to consider. We must never forget that farming is a business, and so profit will always be a major factor in the decision-making process. And as many better management practices have co-benefits which are difficult to evaluate and may take many years to accumulate. This means that a lot of producers don't always see the results that they're expecting from adoption of better management practices. However, over time, producers do become more open to adoption as they can see the beneficial outcomes happening. However, one last thing to consider, how the management time horizons can influence the time scale for better management practice results. About 40% of farmland in Canada is is rented, and so that limits quite often the time scale that producers are wanting to see results. Next slide, please.
So to further enhance producers' ability to overcome the barriers and to foster the enabling conditions discussed by Callum, we also explored how strengthening the science and policy interface can lead to further improvements in policy and program design. So the science and policy interface is where scientific findings are utilized to inform policy and decision-making processes. And through our research, we found that there are actually a number of ways to improve this interface and take more of a systems approach. The first being developing more inclusive decision-making processes where producers, researchers, policymakers, and other key actors co-create solutions and collaboratively engage in piloting the actual policies and market mechanisms. So the Living Labs program in Canada provides an excellent opportunity for actors to test and trial different BMPs and technologies, but there is also an opportunity in these types of highly collaborative programs to test the effectiveness and efficacy of policies and market mechanisms that will ultimately be the tools that incentivize producers to adopt practices. Examples of programs that do this internationally is Finland's Carbon Action Initiative. And in our report, we point to a few other programs that provide this opportunity to test and pilot the actual policies and markets. Research we reviewed also suggested that the design of policies and programs should allow for the adaptability and flexibility of contextual factors and science to inform the formation of those programs over time. So our knowledge is evolving on what BMPs and combinations of BMPs can really enhance soil organic carbon and other co-benefits such as biodiversity and improved water quality in different regions across Canada. And some researchers suggest that programs and policies that support producers in adoption should have the capacity to integrate these new findings and solutions as they become more developed. And lastly, our research finds that it is really important to foster trust, transparency, and legitimacy among actors that are engaging at the science and policy interface, and to acknowledge where actors' values and biases may be influencing science and policy. So I'll pass it over to Hannah now, who will wrap things up for us.
So our major findings from our work show that firstly, understanding organic matter inputs and processing are really key for increasing carbon sequestration. And this is especially important given that climate change will change how the moisture, temperature, and other environmental factors that Canadian agricultural land will experience in the future. So learning how to adapt to new conditions as well. We found that increasing biomass, so that first lever that Marie-Élise talked about, is the most promising way to increase soil carbon in Canadian cropland. The key barriers that we identified for adoption of beneficial management practices that increase carbon sequestration are risk and uncertainty with new practices, high upfront costs, as well as environmental constraints. The key enabling conditions we identified are producer engagement and policy design, especially at the beginning of the design process, evidence of return on investment, and affordable measurement and monitoring tools. Lastly, we found to improve science-based policy design, it's important to utilize multiple disciplines, scientific findings, promote collaboration between stakeholders, and enable on-the-ground pilot testing of policy and market approaches. Our recommendations in the short term, we encourage increasing collaborative opportunities for creating policy that utilizes our really rich current understanding of which beneficial management practices enhance carbon sequestration, as well as the barriers and enabling conditions for their adoption. In the long term, we recommend investing in research and infrastructure that furthers our understanding of how to increase and measure carbon storage under different environmental and changing conditions. And lastly, in both the short and the long term, we recommend that we foster greater multidisciplinary collaboration, because this really allows for us to understand the immense complexities in determining, designing, and implementing policy that increases carbon sequestration in cropland. We'd just like to thank the CAPI team and the advisory group for all their help and support in our research, and we're looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Wow, what a tremendous final report, folks. Thanks very much, Hannah, Lisa, Marie-Élise, and Callum for your work on this. Certainly, you've moved the bar since a year ago when we first met and had the first webinar. So thanks for that. I have a number of questions, and I see there are a number of questions on the coming from our viewers. We'd encourage you to submit your questions using the question and answer function, but I get to ask some questions first. So my first question, and I'll look to you folks to kick in with some answers, but what are the key areas of research to focus on to improve carbon sequestration in Canadian cropland? I know one of you might take the lead, but I'll certainly look forward to hearing from all of you.
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to answer this question, Senator Black. So I could just say that during the last decades, soil scientists really went through a major shift in their understanding of soil organic matter cycle and stabilization processes. So there is really a great amount of fundamental research that still has to be done regarding the mechanisms and the factors influencing soil carbon cycles. Keeping in mind that carbon cycles is really closely tied to the nitrogen, the phosphorus cycle as well. So this is really important to keep in mind for plant productivity as well. And so better understanding these fundamental mechanisms could also help us develop reliable mechanistic models. And these models could, in the end, help us predict the net environmental and agronomic effect of a given management practice, but under different paleoclimatic conditions. So this would really be useful. However, achieving this will require lots of data and soil. So that brings us to the next challenge for soil research scientists. So research should also focus on developing new technologies to improve the efficiency of soil carbon stocks measurements. And finally, maybe at the country scale, developing new infrastructures such as, for instance, pan-Canadian monitoring network would be incredibly valuable, and not only for scientists, but also for policymakers and farmers.
Thanks very much, Marie-Élise. Anyone else? Hannah, Callum, Lisa?
I think Marie-Élise nailed it for us.
All right, thanks very much. My second question is, why is collaboration important? I heard that word collaboration a number of times. So why is collaboration important in enhancing carbon sequestration? And how do we encourage collaboration amongst diverse stakeholders?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think we all, in working in multidisciplinary teams, have really come to face that collaboration is crucial, especially as we address complex problems like agriculture's role in climate change. No one actor or organization can really come up with coherent solutions on their own. So broadly, that's why I think collaboration is important. But applying that to the context of enhancing carbon sequestration, there are so many key elements that need to happen to be elevated to better position producers to adopt practices. So for example, like what Marie-Élise was saying, we need improved measuring, reporting, and verification systems. We need advancements in the tech innovation itself. Better access to technical assistance around soil health and regenerative agriculture for producers as they test and trial these new practices. And then the development of the actual markets and policies and the different levers that need to be in place. So this is such a wide range of things that need to happen. So collaboration is really important. And to answer the second part of the question, how to foster collaboration, I think there's a real opportunity to promote greater partnerships across public and private entities to really scale the collective capacity as commodity groups, agri-food companies, and governments set these big, ambitious net zero targets. I think there's a real opportunity to see where there's opportunities to be better aligned and develop coherency to reach the collective capacity in Canada.
Great. Folks, anything else to add, or did she nail that answer? I think we have a number of questions coming from our audience, and I think Tyler wants to jump in with a question from one of our audience members. Tyler.
Great. Thank you, Senator Black. And this is a question that will build on a couple of that have come in and pick up on some thoughts, the comments that Lisa just made. The question was around the Government of Canada's On-Farm Climate Action Fund. For those who don't know, this is in the last two budgets has been a very significant investment. I think now just under $700 million committed over the life of the program. The first question that came in was around, will the program be helpful in implementing BMPs? But building on comments from your presentation, I was wondering if the fellows would touch on the challenge of a national program incenting a small number of BMPs when we talk about that challenge of variability, and also building, I think, on something that Lisa said. How should a program like this work with other public and private programs, and what opportunities are there to make the public programs be enabler of broader action?
All right, who wants to take a stab at that?
I can start.
Yes, please.
So I think that ONCAF funding has done a great job in identifying delivery partners that are regionally specific, so have an understanding of the local context and the needs that need to happen in terms of scaling those practices. In terms of really scaling its potential, I think there's a greater opportunity for those types of big funding programs and policies to align with what's happening in the private sector, because there is a lot of momentum in terms of how they are developing projects and pilots to meet their net zero targets, and to avoid issues of duplication and excluding producers from different programs. I think that there's a real opportunity to align better across public and private lines. And going back to Marie-Élise's point, I think there's also an opportunity to better share data and to collectively invest in data collection, because we do still have some pretty significant data gaps around soil organic carbon. So while that pot of money seems quite substantial, we have pretty big problems to address. So I think greater collaboration across public and private partnerships would be really useful.
Thanks. Anyone else care to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I won't pretend that that my expertise lies in policy design or how to incorporate that, but I think one thing that we constantly were talking about when we were designing this report is that there really is no one size fits all. And I come from much more a soil biogeochemistry basic background, and there's a saying you know, like an inch might as well be a mile, something like that. So soils, even in the same field, are really diverse. And so creating policy around this kind of really flexibility and this like really adaptations. And then also understanding that future climate conditions are not going to be the same as they are today. And so incorporating the ability to adapt to new and changing environments, I think it will be key if we want a lasting policy.
Thanks very much. I'm going to jump in with a third question right now, and we'll get back to you, Tyler. So back to the fellows, what has been your approach to working as a multidisciplinary team? What have you learned from working as a group? You've been together 2 years now, or almost 2 years. What have you learned?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. I think as like PhD students and academics, we get sometimes very lost in our own very specific topics. And I have the tendency to forget that anything else kind of exists outside of my world. And so being able to both speak with people who are doing things kind of related, but also very different and in very different approaches has certainly helped me understand the impacts of my research as well as strengthen my own. In terms of our report itself, I think we really tried to play to our own strengths. But I mean, it was interesting, like even terminology we found, we didn't necessarily all agree on and use in the same way. And I think we're in a pretty similar sphere, but like it's shocking the differences that our fields have. So I think it highlighted both this need to work together and create common language and better policy in the future.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks very much. I have one last question, and then we'll get to the public portion. So, folks, what do you believe is the most common barrier facing best management practices adoption, and what measures should be taken to overcome this specific barrier?
I'll take that one, Senator Black. Well, I think that there are numerous barriers, but I think one of the ones which showed up a lot through my research across 4 provinces when I was looking specifically at cover crops was really being able to get past the initial upfront costs associated with adoption, coupled with it being very difficult for farmers to really be able to see what benefits they're seeing, because a lot of the benefits from better management practices are, they may be very difficult for those farmers to gauge, and quite often it takes several years for the benefits to be seen. And that coupled with the fact that farmers associate adopting beneficial management practices with often increasing risk on their farms, that can be a big challenge. So I really think one of the best ways we can try and enable use of better management practices would really be able to provide farmers with quality information of how they can implement these practices, but also how these practices actually are likely to influence their financial health of their business, but also let's look at some of the environmental benefits as well these producers will be seeing. And then once these farmers can actually look at these benefits, and they can also have a look at what risks and problems they may also be facing, then these producers can try and also mitigate and work ways around these challenges. So I really think as long as we can provide farmers with good quality data, then it will help them get past this initial investment and they'll be able to make good decisions.
Thanks very much, Callum. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tyler. I know there's a number of questions that have come in from our listeners. So Tyler, what are you seeing there on that list?
Yes, thank you, Senator Black. Again, so a couple of questions around policy innovation, and so to the group, you know, one of the questions notes that Canada's effectively had the same ag and environment policy for decades. The foundations, the pillars have been the same, and so the question is around, you know, around new approaches and what policy innovation could look like in this space. And I want to combine that with a second question around international case studies. So as you looked around the world, what are more innovative countries doing? What are more cutting edge contemporary policies that we could be deploying in Canada?
Maybe, yeah, Lisa, you can go for the first part of the question, and I'd be happy to follow with the international.
Okay, great. Yeah, so looking ahead at the next policy framework for agriculture, I think there is a real opportunity to create more spaces for innovation and testing and trialing of the actual policies and market mechanisms that we think might work. We see them in research, we see them in case studies, but we don't really know within the Canadian context or the prairie provinces or maybe in Ontario, Quebec, how it will actually play out. So I think creating more spaces and directing more funding to the innovation and the actual policy design is really important. I think within the Canadian context, there is also a real opportunity to improve our reporting of program efficacy and effectiveness. So actually collecting data on what was the agri-environmental impacts from certain cost share programs, from certain extension programs, and so on. So I think we really need better data to understand not only what is happening on our farms, but what's the relationship between policy and outcomes, because that can help us develop more informed decision-making processes. And just one example I'll give in terms of other countries creating space for innovation is the US recently invested $1 billion into the Climate Smart commodity program. And this program is really about that testing and trialing different ideas that can position carbon and other ecosystem services as a value add in the food system. So returning that revenue back to farmers, creating new opportunities, I think is really important, but we need to test them before we launch them on a large scale. So yeah, over to Marie-Élise to discuss about that more.
Yeah, yes, okay, sound on, sorry. Yeah, so I think what's going on in the United States is really great regarding carbon sequestration, but we can also look at what's been done in the past years, and I think Australia has really been a pioneer in soil carbon sequestration policies. And I was recently talking with one of the researchers that implemented those strategies in Australia, and they really thought they should go with a strategy based on measurements. And with this, they were really conscious that there would be many challenges associated with measuring organic carbon stock changes, but they were really, they would say they would only give money for about 60% of the measured organic carbon stock. So they were really conservative in the way they would implement those policies, knowing that science isn't really there yet. And I've heard even now farmers, instead of really measuring, can use modeling to prove they've stored carbon in the soil, as long as modeling matches the actual few measurements they would do on the farm. So they've gone with this measurement strategy. Whereas in France, France has been a leader as well in carbon sequestration, namely through the 4 per
1,000.
Thank you. Initiative. That's the English, not the memory. Yeah, and they've been leaders too, but they have a policy that is more oriented towards practices recommendations, and probably that's fine, because they're working with a much smaller country with very homogeneous soils and climate. But here in Canada, we have to think about the fact that we're this very big country with a big variation in both climate and soil types, even within one one farm in Quebec, we can deal with many different soil types. And so that's our reality. And I think policies should be based on the fact that we have to deal with this huge variability.
I would also add that I think governments around the world which really act to try and foster quality extension programs at sort of local and sort of state provincial level, they're absolutely fantastic. It's I've toured sort of extension groups in North Dakota, in Florida, in Arkansas, and a lot of farmers really rely on these groups to get quality information. And I think that it cannot be understated the power to actually invest in your extension.
Having been a former extension agent, I want to say thanks for that, Callum. But my next question is, do you think Canada's ag sector can reach net zero CO2 equivalent by 2030 or 2050? And are there other management practices and technologies beyond cover cropping, crop diversification, tillage reduction, and crop diversification that can help all of us achieve this outcome? We are coming to the end of our time, so let's just keep our answers tight. Who wants to take that question?
I can start it unless someone else wants to.
Thanks,
okay.
Lisa.
Yeah, and sorry to sound like a broken record, but I think we really do need better data to understand where we are at right now, to then carve out a pathway forward in terms of where should we really be focusing on enhancing carbon sequestration and then reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also avoiding greenhouse gas emissions as well. So for example, by avoiding conversion of grasslands to croplands. So having that better data and a better baseline understanding on where we are at will give us a more informed understanding of how we can actually reach those 2030 and 2050 targets. In regards to the different practices, trying to find that question again. Oh, maybe it's gone. There are definitely a variety of practices, and I think Marie-Élise really clearly laid out that the combination of practices will really vary depending on which region you're in, but there is also opportunity for innovation and types of practices. So I saw someone wrote about biochar, which is a really innovative approach to enhancing soil carbon sequestration, but I think it's still somewhat in its infancy stage. So investing in these early, these more innovative type of technologies and tools may also show promise as we inch closer to 2030 and 2050 targets. But yeah, I'll let others speak now.
Marie-Élise.
Yeah, can I just add on this? There are a few technologies as well that it could be developed, such as perennial crops, you know, so perennial wheat, developing a perennial wheat that would allow the same productivity as annual wheat would make a huge difference. And preserving crop rotations that include perennial crops would also be really important, because our reality here in Eastern Canada is that we currently lose carbon because producers tend to switch from dairy farms to broadacre farms, and that means that they stop cropping perennial crops on their lands, and that has a major effect on soil organic carbon stocks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, so I work kind of on the opposite side of carbon sequestration. So I look at a lot of destabilization processes. And I think one thing, I think one thing is we forget how many tools we have with these cover crops, with these diversity, and they are really useful, but they're not only useful for increasing carbon sequestration, they actually can also help buffer against these destabilizing processes. So like increasing biomass and plant roots really helps with flooding and making that infiltration and preventing waterlogging. So I think these practices we have, I think sometimes we take for granted, but they're really, I think we have a lot of tools that we can use. We just need to figure out the combinations, where to use them, and the best practices for them in individual fields.
Thanks very much. Callum?
I was just going to say, I mean, everyone's done brilliant answering this question so far, but as we think of the three sort of key areas that are going to be funded, we need to realize that each of it's not a complete list, as we've been saying, and each of these is not a silver bullet. Like, for example, you might not be able to cover crop every year, but if we look at the whole thing as a system, there's many different ways that we can try and reduce CO2. But as I say that again, cover crops in many cases, you know, they may not have the results that people want for carbon sequestration, but as Hannah said, there's all these co-benefits. And this goes for many of the practices that we've discussed today.
Thanks very much. I know we have time for one more question, and then I think we have to wrap up. Tyler, take it away.
Oui, merci. Je vais poser la question en français.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask the question. I would like to have your perspective on how you can involve farm producers in co-designing solutions. And many people have asked that question. So are they involved today? And how can you involve them more in future decision-making processes?
Peut-être Marie-Élise en français, tu peux commencer.
Maybe Marie-Élise could start and answer the question in French. That would be my real pleasure. But I think maybe this might be something that Callum is interested in more than I am. So Callum, would you want to take it away?
Yes. Well, obviously I can't speak for everything, but what I have been doing is hearing from farmers that I think that it's very good to actually listen to farmers, hear what their concerns are, hear what they want, hear what they need, and then try and design policy around that. So we hear that farmers are struggling in a specific place with cover crops. We can then try and find ways around. We can direct resources to try and help mitigate challenges and enable adoption. It's as simple as that, making sure that farmers feel valued. And I mean, there's quite often a feeling among some farmers that researchers, policymakers aren't listening to them. So all we need to do is just try and encourage them to be a part of this this process, because this is why we're doing it, to help them and to help the whole world by extension.
Thanks very much. As we wrap up, I want to say thanks to Marie-Élise, Hannah, Callum, and Lisa for your contributions today and your contributions over 2 years, pulling together information that you presented last year and then this final report. As chair of the Agriculture and Forestry Committee in the Senate of Canada, and as you know, we're soon to undertake a soil study, a health and soils in Canada study. Well, Tyler, I think we've got 4 excellent witnesses here. And I'll look forward to our paths crossing again, folks, into the future. It's been my pleasure. Tyler, thanks again for the opportunity. I'm going to turn it back to you to wrap things up.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. We do look forward to seeing your study move forward. And again, I think we look forward to hearing presentations from these 4 and others like them across the country that are young and engaged and passionate about soil and climate change in agriculture and the role that it can play. Traduire la science en politique est beaucoup plus facile à dire qu'à faire.
So translating science into policy is actually easier to say than to achieve, and that is very true in health, soil health, and agriculture. And I just want to thank all the doctoral fellows for their efforts and efforts that will help promote better decision-making processes. And this is a complex issue and requires dynamic and complex policies as well. I'm really looking forward to see what they will produce in the longer term and to see how we can promote political solutions in this area. We need, especially in an area that requires critical thinking, and that is at the intersection of science and policy. So thank you very much, everyone.
Recording will be shared with all, and the report will be released in the near future. Thank you very much, and have a great day.